So now it's time to introduce your speakers of today. My colleague Cinzia Misiroli, who is the head of the unit Sustainability and Services at CCMC, and she will be accompanied today by Alexandre Lafayette de Levergem, who is program manager in the same unit. Well, it's time to start the webinar, so I leave you the floor for the first part of the session.
Good morning, Alexandre speaking. I will present to you the part relating to the role of New Approach consultants. And in that part, I will first start with a little reminder on harmonized standards and the New Approach, because New Approach consultants stem from there. I will go further to the role of New Approach consultants in theory, what we expect of them, then how they do that in practice and how they interact with TCs and working groups, and I will end with a number of administrative aspects for your information mainly. So the New Approach, as you know, was devised in the 80s as a way for European standards to support a number of pieces of legislation in the European Union. As you know, in the European Union, there are directives and regulations that are mandatory for manufacturers and service providers. They lay down quite general safety or quality requirements that manufacturers and service providers have to comply with. And by virtue of the New Approach, under a number of those directives and regulations, the European Commission can issue standardization requests, previously known as mandates, to CEN and CENELEC, and actually also to ETSI. Based on those requests, we can develop European standards that will enable manufacturers to comply quite easily with those directives and regulations. And those European standards, as you know, are always voluntary, even though they are developed under a mandate. They are called harmonized standards as soon as they are published by CEN or CENELEC, even though they are not listed yet in the official journal. Then we offer them to the European Commission for OJ citation, and the Commission can accept them or reject them. And as soon as they accept them for OJ citation, the standards officially can provide presumption of conformity with the requirements of the directive or the regulation. And in that case, the manufacturer can apply the CE marking on his product. And in certain cases, the product is actually checked by notified bodies based on those standards. Now, those harmonized standards, as you know, have to have an Annex ZA in CEN, an Annex ZZ in CENELEC, in which the legal requirements of the directive or of the regulation covered by the standard are mentioned. And that's where the New Approach consultant steps in, because at the end of the development process of the standards, he will have to deliver a positive assessment on the standard intended for harmonization, and that positive assessment will be a very strong incentive showing to the European Commission that they can publish the standard in the official journal with a very high probability that it will indeed enable manufacturers to be in line with the directive or the regulation. Now, that's where the consultant has to act, because developing such a harmonized standard may not be as easy as it seems due to the regulatory aspects. And the role of New Approach consultants is to assist those experts developing the standard in preparing harmonized standards that are accurate from a regulatory point of view. And that is to be done by delivering recommendations or any kinds of explanations or other support to the TC or the working group, always in relation to the mandate under which the standard is developed and in relation to the directive or regulation and its requirements. So that implies that actually the consultant, and that is very important to remember, the consultant is never responsible for the technical content of the standard, nor is he responsible for its structure. That is the role of the working group experts developing the standard. And as a consequence, the consultant is not responsible either for the content of the Annex ZA or ZZ. That is also the responsibility of the experts developing the standard. By the way, if a working group exists within CEN or CENELEC, it is that working group who are responsible for the drafting of the Annex Z. And if there is no working group at European level, then it's the ISO or IC working group responsible for that. At all stages of the development process, the consultant is expected to inform the TC or the working group of the compliance of the standards with the piece of legislation covered, either at the request of the TC or working group or spontaneously. He is expected also to involve himself in the development. And TCs are also expected to ask information from him whenever necessary, of course. He monitors and advises on the content of the Annex Z throughout its development process. And what is very important as well is that he is expected to establish a two-way communication channel between the drafters of the standards and the responsible services at the European Commission, so that the desk officers in charge of those standards are aware of the progress of harmonized standards and are aware of the possible problems encountered by the working group and by the TC. The consultant is also welcome to suggest remedies to the working group whenever necessary, at the request of the TC or spontaneously. And finally, last but not least, he, as I said earlier, he is supposed to deliver a formal assessment at the end of the process on the candidate harmonized standards. If that assessment is positive, let's say that it's a green light in the sense that he states that the standard is consistent with the law that is aimed to be covered, and that will be a very strong incentive for the European Commission to then accept that candidate harmonized standard for citation in the official journal of the European Union. And to enable all what has preceded this slide, it is therefore very important for you as TC and working groups to communicate with the consultant at any time of the development process and starting from as early as possible in the process. The consultant should also be granted access to the draft document, the draft standard, as soon as it is available within the working group, so that he is fully involved from the start and can see the progress and how the working group thinks about the standard. And he should also be welcome to all TC and working group meetings deemed necessary, so that he is fully and physically, practically involved in the development of the standard. Now the next slides will show you how the new approach consultants act concretely within a working group or a TC during the whole development process. But before doing that, I would like to remind you of the new procedure that has been put in place in CEN and that will be put in place in CENELEC as of April this year. You know that in order to shorten the development process, it was decided to install a weighted vote during the inquiry stage, both in CEN as of the 1st of January this year and in CENELEC as of April this year. The inquiry will be shortened to 3 months in both cases. In SEN until June, during the transition period, it will be extended to 4 months. But let's stick to 3 months, theoretically. If that weighted vote during the inquiry is positive, it means that the formal vote can be skipped. I say can be skipped because that is not automatic. Under the Vienna Agreement with ISO lead, that stage, the formal vote, is skipped by default in case the vote during inquiry is positive, unless the TC, the SEN TC, decides to go to the formal vote. In all of the cases, the formal vote is maintained by default, unless the TC decides to skip it. That will have implications for the drafting of harmonized standards, of course, and of the implication of the new approach consultant in the work, as you will see. So as you can see, this is the development process of a standard, the classical development process. We'll not go through exceptions at this stage. Once the new work item is adopted, the working group starts drafting the document. And during that stage, as I said, it is important that the consultant is involved very early. During this stage, he gives comments on the content of the draft, comments that have to be linked with the mandate and the piece of legislation, of course, because that's his role. He attends meetings of the working group and the TC. He advises on the accuracy of the Annex Z at every development step. He answers any questions linked to the EU piece of legislation that is covered. And he also informs the European Commission's desk officers of the difficulties, of the progress encountered by the working group, and so on and so forth. It's also important to know that you can request from the consultant an informal assessment of the draft standard at this stage. So he will, let's say, he will simulate a formal assessment to tell you whether the formal assessment would be positive or negative at a further stage. The next stage is the inquiry. Well, due to the new procedure now, because of the fact that the first formal assessment of the consultant will have to take place during inquiry, the Annex Z should be ideally ready at the start of the inquiry. And during the inquiry, it is not before the inquiry, I insist, during the inquiry, the consultant will have to deliver a formal assessment on the draft standard. And actually, the formal assessment consists in a very simple question, basically. Would the draft, if adopted as a European standard, adequately provide presumption of conformity to the legal requirements addressed? He has to answer that question. If, according to him, the answer is yes, he delivers a positive assessment, and it is then possible for the TC to skip the formal vote, depending, of course, on the voting results of the inquiry, which have to be positive. If his answer is no, he delivers a negative assessment, and he accompanies that with the reasons thereof, and in that case, the formal vote is then mandatory. The TC cannot skip the formal vote in case of negative assessment from the consultant, regardless of the results of the inquiry vote. And during inquiry, the consultant can also submit comments on the content of the draft, provided they relate to the regulatory side of things. After the inquiry, the working group, and provided, of course, the formal vote is not skipped, the working group handles the comments from the inquiry and continues drafting the draft standard. Important to know is that there is no obligation whatsoever to take account of the consultant's comments that he submitted during the inquiry, but obviously it is strongly recommended if the standard is to be ultimately accepted in the official journal. Again, he can give any kind of written comments linked to the regulatory side of things. He attends the meetings organized by the working group or the TC. He advises on the accuracy of the Annex Z at any stage. He answers questions from the drafters of the standard. And again, he establishes a bi-directional channel of communication between the drafters and the responsible EC desk officers when necessary. Once the TC has decided to push the draft standard to the formal vote, CCMC receives that standard and submits it to the consultant for an ultimate formal assessment. And the assessment has to be submitted to CCMC back within 28 days. That's an obligation on the consultant. That happens before the formal vote is launched. And of course, for parallel procedure with IEC, the formal assessment is a bit different. It happens during the FDIS vote, so after the launch of the formal vote. Again, during the formal assessment, the consultant has to ask himself the question, would the draft, if adopted as European standard, adequately provide presumption of conformity to the legal requirements addressed? If yes, it's a positive assessment, and the formal vote or the UAP is launched. It can't be launched until a positive assessment is reached. If his answer is no, he delivers a negative assessment together with the reasons thereof, and the draft is sent back to the TC, who have to redraft it within 6 months, with, of course, the help of the new approach consultant. And then the draft is resubmitted to a new formal assessment, and that is repeated until the formal assessment is positive. So that was for the development process. I hope it has enlightened you a little bit about how you can be helped adequately by the consultant. For your information, I will give you now a few administrative elements related to the contracts of the new approach consultants. You have to know that they are contracted by CEN and CENELEC, although the funding comes from the European Commission. Their contracts are one-year contracts. They are renewable every year, but every 4 years we have an obligation to launch a new call for candidates. In order to justify their hiring by us, the consultants have to report to CCMC every 6 months on the activities they have been carrying out, and then CCMC every year, once per year, reports to the European Commission on what the consultants have achieved and how they have been working over the previous year. That justifies the funding that we receive from the European Commission. As I said, the contracts are awarded after a call for candidates, a public call for candidates that is usually published on our website, and the selection panels then involves the European Commission, the relevant services of the European Commission, the EFTA Secretariat, CCMC, and the CEN or CENELEC sector rapporteur, if it exists. If there is no rapporteur, then it's the chair or chairs of the TCs concerned. During the selection process, we assess several things. As you imagine, the consultants have to have a fairly good knowledge of both the regulatory side of things and the technical side of things. So we assess their experience and their knowledge of the technical and scientific elements of the sector covered. We assess their knowledge of the directives and the regulations at EU level, their experience in standardization, of course. Ideally, they should also have some knowledge of the main rules that we have within CEN and CENELEC, development rules, internal regulations, etc., and also the knowledge of the Vienna and Dresden agreements, because a whole lot of standards candidate for harmonization are developed either at ISO level or IEC level. And because they will have to interact with a number of people from diverse backgrounds within working groups and TCs, we also assess the soft skills of new approach consultants. If you want to know more details about their roles and duties, you can always refer to the CEN-CENELEC Guide 15, which is an official guide of CEN and CENELEC, where the tasks and responsibilities of new approach consultants are laid down, and it is available on our website. You have the hyperlink on the presentation that you will receive afterwards. Now I leave the floor to Cinzia, who will tell you how to cope with the absence of new approach consultants in some circumstances. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Alexandre, for this comprehensive overview. And indeed, during the previous slides, you have been reminded of the role of the new approach consultant, both from a theoretical as well as a practical point of view, and you have been also informed about the procedures on how we appoint a new approach consultant and their duties. As a matter of fact, in this second part of the presentation, I will remind you of a few key aspects that are always valid, and I would like to stress always, but particularly during this month during which new approach consultants are not in place and cannot assist the technical bodies. As a matter of fact, is the ESO's responsibility to ensure that the standards developed are of the necessary good quality and that are developed according to the rules that are in place in CEN and CENELEC. And it's also the ESO's responsibility to ensure that the standards that are developed, the harmonized standards, are in line with the mandate and therefore with the request and expectation of the European Commission, and that also meet the essential requirements that are laid down in the relevant directive and regulations. And is of course the responsibility of the ESOs to offer this harmonized standard to the European Commission for citation in the official journal. On the other hand, is the decision as well as the responsibility of the European Commission to cite those standards in the official journal and therefore to confirm that the harmonized standard provides presumption of conformity to the relevant piece of legislation. As you have been, as said, reminded during this presentation, the new approach consultants are a good support and, in a way, a control mechanism on the work of the technical bodies, and ensure that what CEN and CENELEC develop is in line with what is expected and is in line with the relevant piece of legislation. But there is a but, is our responsibility, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that the standards developed are of good quality and conform with the request of the European Commission and conform with the piece of legislation. Therefore, the process should not falter because of their absence. So we should, CEN and CENELEC shall ensure that the products that are developed are indeed of the necessary level of quality. Therefore, during this period and during the absence of the new approach, it is important that the technical bodies continue to work as they usually do, and continue with the drafting of the European standard and respect the rules and processes that are in place in SEN and SENELEC. Therefore, we invite the technical bodies to keep on working on their draft, to submit them to inquiry, and then, if necessary, to the formal vote. Of course, if there is a need for any help, any support, CCMC is there to guide you, and especially in case there is a need to liaise with the European Commission. And indeed, our advice is to liaise with the European Commission prior to the offering of the harmonized standard for listing in the official journal, in case there is any doubt, in case during the development of the standard there is questions concerning the interpretation of the relevant piece of legislation. Therefore, please, for any doubts, contact the SEN/SENELEC Management Center, the relevant program manager that is there to support you and guide you in this case. I would like to finish by reminding you key learning points that took place during this presentation. First of all, that the new approach consultant have an advisory role that is applied throughout the whole development process of the relevant European standards. The new approach consultants are not responsible for the technical content or the structure of the standard, but they are there to support you and guide you in this respect. The new approach consultants are indeed managed by the SEN/SENELEC Management Center, but they are funded from, by the European Commission and EFTA. The process itself should not be hampered because of the absence of the new approach consultant. So the technical committee should continue working as they usually do. And the offering of the harmonized standard is the responsibility and the decision of SEN, ultimately of SEN and SENELEC. Therefore, once we publish the standards that are developed in line with the mandate, is the SEN and SENELEC responsibility to offer those for citation in the official journal. But as said, is ultimately the responsibility of the European Commission to decide whether the adopted and offered harmonized standards are suitable for a citation in the official journal, and therefore provides presumption of conformity to the European legislation. These were the key, let's say, learning point or messages that we wanted to pass through this, with this presentation. As said, we invite the technical bodies to continue working and to contact CCMC and the relevant program managers in case of need. Thank you very much, and I leave the floor to Nathalie.
Okay, thank you very much, Cinzia and Alexandre, for this useful presentation.